right, hello, my name is Anna Barker, and here we are gathered again to talk about who else? Napoleon Bonaparte. He seems to be the most integral part of all the 19th century narratives that we have been covering together. And so those of you who don't know me, I've been doing this since 2020, when the world locked down and all of us sequestered ourselves in our tiny little spaces. I realized that I need to reach out because waving my arms is very important to me. And so those of you who are reading me and wondering what's the deal with the 3 exclamation points, they are my written visual representation of my arms going like this when I get super excited about literature. And so we have done a ton of these so far. We have gone through, we started with the Decameron because that was the perfect plague narrative. And then we read Paradise Lost, and I'm actually reading sections of Paradise Lost with my students tomorrow. So this is very exciting. I actually do stay with these books because they are so important to me. And then we did, of course, already Brothers Karamazov. So Dostoevsky is not new to us. War and Peace, and then we have gone through a ton of French literature, Balzac, Stendhal, Hugo, Flaubert, and we already read one novel by Alexandre Dumas a few years ago, The Count of Monte Cristo, and in the next 3 years, we are going to continue our journey with Alexandre Dumas. So last summer, we read The Three Musketeers, and we are so literature nerd that we are going to read not just the first sequel, but the second sequel to The Three Musketeers. So we're having way too much fun. And as I announced already, in the spring, we are going to read a book that nobody reads. I mean, we don't just like read books. We read books that nobody has read in centuries. So just kidding. We're going to read a couple of novels by the Hungarian writer Jókai Imre. He is going to be 200 in February, and we are going to try to read a couple of translations that will be only available online. It's very hard to find him in print in English, but he used to be Queen Victoria's favorite non-English writer. So we will celebrate Hungarian culture and Hungarian history because one of the novels that we'll read with him is dedicated to the failed Hungarian Revolution of 1848. And so I'll learn a great deal about Austrian history, Austro-Hungarian history, the history of the Holy Roman Empire, because that 1,000-year institution keeps catching up with us in all of these narratives that we have been dealing with. So that's just sort of a review of everything we've done so far. And 2028 will be a big year in all of our lives because Tolstoy will be 200. And as you know, I teach a class at the University of Iowa entitled Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. So I've taught War and Peace 20 times, and I can't wait to teach it again. I'm teaching it again in January. And then in 2028, we will spend the entire year with Tolstoy. I'm planning all kinds of events. So if you are going to be close to Iowa City in Iowa, please join the fun. And 2028 is just around the corner. So because 2028 is still a few years away, I decided to have fun with Dostoevsky in the meantime. Some of you already read Brothers Karamazov with me. And I have students who tell me, Anna, you read 3,000 pages in one semester. I don't have time to take this class, but I really want to read these authors. So if I have time for just one Tolstoy novel, what should it be? And I always tell my students, just read War and Peace. It is phenomenal. It is fantastic. He's young. He's energetic. He has everything figured out when he writes War and Peace. When he gets to Anna Karenina, which we read last fall, things get more complicated in Tolstoy's life. It's amazing to see a man who 10 years earlier in War and Peace has these incredible epiphanies. I always tell my students in War and Peace, you get an epiphany every 25 pages or your money back. And everything seems to come to the kind of conclusion where we feel like this is it. Things are settled. We get to a point of understanding. In Anna Karenina, we don't get there, not throughout the novel, not at the end of the novel. And so then the students tell me, so, okay, fine, I'll read War and Peace, one and done. And then with Dostoevsky, should we just read Brothers Karamazov? And then I immediately say, no, you can't just read Brothers Karamazov. You have to read all of Dostoevsky. So this pile of books that you have right there that has Notes from Underground, on top of it, Crime and Punishment, on top of it, The Idiot, on top of it, Demons, on top of it, The Adolescent, and on top of it, Brothers Karamazov. So that's the progression that we are looking forward to in the next 4 years. And Notes from Underground is the foundational book because seemingly Dostoevsky at this moment of intense psychological calamity, nothing was working out for him at the time when he wrote Notes from Underground. And I really feel that that first section of Notes from Underground, the first 40 pages, is the foundational exploration of all of the future ideas that will end up in the Great Five. And references to Napoleon abide. It's we just finished Notes from Underground. That's why I wanted to have a Zoom meeting that was scheduled last moment, but I felt that if we don't do it now, time is going to get away from us, and Crime and Punishment will require a couple of meetings to decipher. So I love my old copy of Notes from Underground because it conveniently actually fell apart into two sections. It just sort of happened. So, and it fell apart into part one and part two. And we talked about Dostoevsky. So those of you who are following me on the UNESCO Dostoevsky site, UNESCO, Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature Dostoevsky site, or on Substack. And I started writing on Substack. So it's amazing to explore both platforms. And eventually I'm going to just choose one or the other. But I think throughout the fall, I will still double post, which requires a little extra effort, but I'm still learning about both of them. And so I like some features in one, I like some features in the other. And at some point, I'll just have to say, you're sticking to just one or the other. I'm not ready for that yet. But those of you who are following me, I started posting Dostoevsky related material in August. There were some announcements, and one of the most important part of the announcement for this entire period of my 2 cents go with Substack. Okay, very good. 'Tis done. Say no more. What makes the other platform so much more convenient because I can do them one book at a time. So then you don't have to go through the whole scroll. It's amazing how, stylus and tablet were the way we wrote things down 3,000 years ago, and we're back to using the tablet and the stylus. And the scroll was how things were written like 2,000 years ago, and we're back to scroll. So I feel that with Substack, I end up with an eternal scroll where I'm actually downloading all of my information from the UNESCO City of Literature pages so that I would have references to all of the commentary that I made. And eventually I would like to actually count, have a word count of everything that I've written in the past 4 years. And it's a scroll at this point. It's just a continuous narrative of Anna Barker hyperventilating about her favorite books. And so when we get to Dostoevsky, we have a writer who is so incredibly complex and so incredibly relatable. And my commentary from August, when I was just getting started, and I was telling everyone that yes, we're reading all of Dostoevsky. We're reading even The Adolescent, the novel that everyone seems to skip. They just want to rush from Demons to Brothers Karamazov, skip The Adolescent. And I always tell students, you really can't understand the genius of two teenage boy characters like Olenka Krasotkin and Alyosha Karamazov and Brothers Karamazov, unless you suffer with Dostoevsky through The Adolescent, because it's a novel where he spends an entire stretch in the mind of an adolescent boy. And so Arkady Dolgoruki is a very strange character. It's a novel that is not as psychologically complex or enticing as, let's say, Idiot and Demons. But if you want to fully understand the genius of those two teenage characters in Brothers Karamazov, getting through adolescent is extremely helpful. And then we'll also dip into some earlier pieces, the pieces that were written before Notes from Underground. So I really feel that we should read Demons. We should read The Double. We should read The Gambler. We should read maybe even Poor Folk and White Knights, and definitely Notes from the Dead House. So we'll combine, just like right now, we're focusing on Crime and Punishment, but I felt that the foundational text for Crime and Punishment and all the future novels is Notes from Underground. I'm going to keep combining the shorter, lesser known works with the spectacular, well-known works. So in my announcement in August, I suggested that perhaps before Crime and Punishment, we read Notes from Underground. And I think before Adolescent, we're going to read The Insulted and the Injured, and then just draw parallels between these works. You really have to familiarize yourself with The Double before you read Demons, because the doubling there is so profound and so significant. And it's nice to see how Dostoevsky solved or proposed the solution to some of the psychological and philosophical issues that he will start resolving in later novels, and how he dealt with them in the earlier novels. So with Dostoevsky, so to answer my student's question, if I can read just one, what should I read? And I say War and Peace, and that's fantastic. But with Dostoevsky, I say, no, it's not enough to read Brothers Karamazov. You have to read all of Dostoevsky. And you probably noticed when we were reading the first 40 pages of Notes from Underground, so part one, as my torn book suggests, I already commented to you. So when Dostoevsky is the voice in Notes from Underground is marvelous. It is absolutely marvelous. Dostoevsky is having fun. He's in so much pain, and he's having fun at the same time. It's completely unreliable voice. The Underground Man sometimes says, "But wait, let me catch my breath." Or then in parentheses, it's you speaking now. Or then later on, it's like, this is me speaking again. So he is so incredibly engaging. I love the fact that he keeps saying, "Dear readers," but wait. And I love all of those asides where he says, "It's immoral to live past 40, but I'm going to live past 50, 60, 70. Oh, let me catch my breath." And so this just kind of breathless and full-mouthed scream of the human soul that Dostoevsky manages to capture in 40 pages. It is engaging, delightful, infuriating, and essential for the voices that we'll be hearing in his future novels. He's fooling with us, he's playing with us, he's messing with us, and he's loving it. And those of you who are reading my biographical notes for Dostoevsky, you know that there's a lot of stuff happening in his life that is not conducive to human contentment. So first, he's 28 when he's arrested for revolutionary agitation. And it's fascinating how when we'll be reading Yokai more, we'll see the catastrophic results of the revolution of 1848 in Hungarian cultural life and Hungarian political life. Yoko Imor was on the barricades of the revolution of 1848. And a lot of his friends were put against the wall and shot by the firing squad. So being shot by the firing squad was a thing during the revolution of 1848. As a matter of fact, the cemetery where Yokai Moore is buried in Budapest, some of the first burials at that cemetery were the revolutionaries who were put against the wall in 1848. And that's how the cemetery got started. And so Dostoevsky was one of those kids who decided that agitating and reading books that are politically vibrant and politically subversive and explosive is a way to deal with a reality that you cannot alter and you do not approve of. And these kids were rounded up, sent to the Peter and Paul Fortress, spent a few very unhappy months there. And then in December of 1848, they were told that they are going to be executed by the firing squad. And as I said, that's the one place of cohesion between our fall reading this year and spring reading next year. Those revolutionaries actually did get shot, and in Dostoevsky's case, the mock execution did not result in the shooting of these kids, young men. They were sent to Siberia instead. And so the 4 years of hard labor, during which Dostoevsky was shackled at all times, day and night, even when they were taken to the bathhouse to bathe, they still were shackled on the ankles. So it's like the shackles were put on, and 4 years later, the shackles were taken off. For the longest time, Dostoevsky's step, the shuffle that he made, was just the length of the chain. He had to relearn how to walk after the shackles were taken off. And so his 4 years of penal servitude, students often ask me, what did he do? When we're going to read Notes from the Dead House, you will understand that it's not what you did for your hard labor service. It's the mindless torture of doing something that you know is meaningless that was the hardest psychological barrier that he had to overcome. So they made bricks, they pounded alabaster, they cleared wood, helped around the city of Omsk, which was developing at that time. And then after 4 years of doing this horrendous thing, which he described so incredibly powerfully in Notes from the Dead House, then he spends 6 years in Semipalatinsk, which is today Seme in Kazakhstan, where he serves as a guard in another facility. And remember that Dostoevsky is a published author, he's a college graduate, he's a commissioned officer. And so all of this happening to him is surreal. He cannot come to terms with this. And then eventually he is allowed to return to St. Petersburg. He gets married in Siberia, and I always tell my students that who wants to marry a convict who will have that as a mark of distinction for the rest of his life? Remember, Dostoevsky was under police surveillance till about 2 or 3 years before he died in 1881. So he was under police surveillance pretty much all his life after his arrest in 1848. And then he has no income, he has no place in society. He is an ex-convict. That's it. Who would marry him? Well, a woman who has consumption, whose husband died, she's a widow, and she has a young son. Who would marry her? No one, but a convict. And so it was a terrible marriage for both of them, but at the time when they married each other, it was the only thing that they could do. He was horrendously lonely, and no woman would look at him. And she knew that she's dying of tuberculosis, and she needed to marry someone who would be the least bit motivated to care for her son after she dies. She knew, I mean, consumption or tuberculosis in the 19th century was a death sentence because it was incurable. And so these two people were thrown into each other's lives with disastrous consequences. They did not necessarily love each other. They suffered with each other. So that kind of marriage is very, very tough. And of course, she's dying at the time when he's writing Notes from Underground. And so that was a hugely complex psychological burden on him. Also, he has no way to make money because some publishers would not publish him after Siberia. And so his brother, Mikhail, goes into a lot of debt. He borrows money to open a couple of magazines to publish his brother. I mean, that's a good brother, right? And Mikhail really couldn't afford to do that because he was married with multiple children. And so Mikhail opened first the magazine Epoch, and then Time, Epocha and Vremya. And that's where Dostoevsky started publishing post-Siberia. It was tough. It was very, very tough. And it was Mikhail who was publishing Notes from Underground. And I love the fact that there are letters between Mikhail and Fyodor. And Fyodor writes in one of his letters to Mikhail, as he is not submitting the next section of Notes from Underground because he hasn't finished it. And so he writes to his brother and says, be my benefactor, give me another month. The thing that I will give you, if you just give me another month, it will not be published in the next issue, but give me 1 month. It's going to be like fantastic, the best thing you've ever read. And so I tell my students that if they're intending to submit a late paper, they should just write a note to me saying, Anna, be my benefactress. Allow me 1 week. Because if you just give me 1 more week, the paper that I will deliver is going to be the most fantastic paper you've ever written. So, if you want to do the my submission is late game, you might as well have the best literary model for submitting something late, and that's Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's just, the best thing ever written. It's like 40 pages that explain us to us. So the reason why I needed to give you this sort of background for when it was written is to show you that Dostoevsky was under so much psychological, physical, financial strain. Can you imagine the mindset of a human being who distills humanity in 40 pages? He must have been on the edge of everything. And this being on the edge of everything is absolutely a part of this narrative. And it's fascinating how this is the third in the set of notes. So the first one is Notes from the Dead House, where he describes, it's a fictionalized account of the experiences that he had in the labor camp. Then the second notes is Winter Notes on Summer Impressions. And those of you who are just the A+ students among you, I can't recommend it enough. It's Dostoevsky's account, as he states in the title. It's his Winter Notes on Summer Impressions of his trip to Europe. He writes about Germany, he writes about France, he writes about England. And to say that he is snarky is a vast understatement. He just says, oh, look at these Europeans. They're constantly telling us how backward and stupid we are and how they have all of these progressive, enlightened ideas. And look at the abject poverty in this progressive, wonderful, wealthy Europe. They treat people like garbage. Just go into any French store and the snotty clerk at this establishment will treat you like an absolute nobody, like a piece of garbage, because as soon as you enter, this French superlative human being will immediately estimate that you cannot afford anything in the store. And so in order to prove to this superlative French human being that you are not a piano key, you're going to spend money that you don't have. I mean, Dostoevsky's voice, this kind of voice of the polemic internal discourse of a human being who is on the edge all the time, he already develops it in Winter Notes on Summer Impressions. And it's funny as heck, and it's so incredibly dramatic and so hilarious. I actually was once in Paris, and I actually had it with me, and I sat in front of the Pantheon because Dostoevsky has a lot of not nice things to say about the Pantheon. And, so, you know how the underground man says, well, I'm just going to sit here in my hole and stick my tongue out at you. Well, what are you going to do about it? So that was my version of sticking my tongue out at the Pantheon in Paris, just reading the section about Dostoevsky lambasting the Pantheon in his Winter Notes from the Dead House. And it's extremely therapeutic. You know, it's just, can you do anything with these monoliths that surround us? Was, you know, what he will later on in Crime and Punishment call the man of bronze. No, you can't. You are a nothing. You are nobody. You are continually feeling the crush of the complete overwhelming massiveness of everything that surrounds you. And so you feel like a bug. You feel like a bug screaming from your own little underground, your pithy little thoughts. And you have to have a certain sense of self-importance in order to produce such sticking out of tongues at men of bronze. I mean, I probably should have read The Bronze Horseman Was You of Pushkin. I made references to it. But when we get to the part where Raskolnikov is going to talk about the great man of history, and how they are permitted to do things that ordinary human beings cannot do because they clad their immorality in the greater good narrative, right? So we do all of these horrible things, but we are the powerful of this world. We do these things because we do this for you. Okay, so how many times have we heard that narrative from powerful human beings? It's done in your name. It's done for you, and you have no way to respond to this. And so that will be one of the arguments of Raskolnikov. At that point, I will post a translation of Pushkin's Bronze Horseman, because you have to understand that reference. And Pushkin's Bronze Horseman is a poem. The title of the poem gives the nickname to the statue of Peter the Great in St. Petersburg. So the spectacular Falconet statue of Peter the Great, of Peter like riding off of this granite pedestal that looks like a wave. Pushkin called the poem the Bronze Horseman. And ever since then, everyone refers to the statue as the Bronze Horseman. And so we will have to, by the way, do you see the painting of David, of Napoleon crossing the Alps? David based the movement of the horse in this painting where he depicts Napoleon on the movement of the horse of Falconet, the movement of the horse that he created for Peter the Great, because David was French, Falconet was French, so everything is connected, right? So this voice of seeming unreason that we examine in The Underground Man is a voice that Dostoevsky developed when he started commenting on the glorious European civilization, the European civilization that keeps telling the Russians that they are stupid and undeveloped. And Dostoevsky says, ha, look at you. I mean, in London, he keeps talking about the Crystal Palace already in Winter Notes and Summer Impressions, because the Crystal Palace was this incredible structure designed by Joseph Paxton for the World Expo. It was Prince Albert's big accomplishment to pull this off, where he brought all of these incredible accomplishments of the Industrial Revolution to be displayed in London. And Dostoevsky saw the Crystal Palace, and he was horrified by it because he felt that, hey, look at this, they just built the next Tower of Babel. That's why the Tower of Babel, that wonderful painting by Bruegel, which is in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, is the main image for our discussions of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment. Because Dostoevsky, when he saw the Crystal Palace, he sort of felt that, oh, here we go again. Here is humanity saying, look at us. We can make structures of glass. And we are so developed, and we are so incredibly enlightened. And look at us, all this progress. We are just leaps and bounds ahead of our own humanity. And then Dostoevsky says, well, not really, because look at the back alleys of London. I mean, he saw child prostitution. He saw all of these destitute human beings. He saw the working class poor who worked 6 days a week and then spent all of Sunday drinking because they just wanted to forget the misery of their existence. I mean, Dostoevsky could not afford to stay in Belgravia. He could not afford to walk down the lovely arcades where expensive English suits were sold to people who had disposable income. Dostoevsky saw the underbelly of London, and he just could not reconcile this puffing out of the chest for the sake of the Crystal Palace with the abject poverty that he saw everywhere around him. And so Dostoevsky brings this Crystal Palace to Notes from Underground. And I love it when the Underground Man says, well, if it's raining and you see a chicken coop, are you going to like keep running till you find a Crystal Palace to conceal yourself from the rain? No, you're going to conceal yourself in a chicken coop. And then his conclusion is, yeah, so chicken coop is just fine if you are going to live your life only to protect yourself from the rain. I mean, his arguments are so infuriating, and they seem to be so counterintuitive, but they're so logical, and we can't stop fighting him. But at the same time, somewhere deep down, we agree with him, and that infuriates us even more because we do not want to associate with the underground man because he's such an unappealing character. And so Dostoevsky creates a character that infuriates us on so many levels, partly because he is so unappealing, and deep down because he is so right. And so that quote that I actually used even for the announcement for this tutorial, what could be expected of a human being endowed with such qualities? Give him such economic preconditions that this human being, will only sleep, eat gingerbread, and those of you who speak Russian, it's prяники. So sleep, eat gingerbread, and worry about the non-sensational world history. And it is here that this human being, out of sheer ingratitude, out of sheer lampoonery, will do something nasty. You can't argue with that. Look around. You constantly see people who make decisions that are not conducive to their happiness. And yet, will they stop and think and revise their action plan? No, they'll just continue making decisions that are not conducive to their happy progress through life. And that's so counterintuitive. And it's like so un-American almost, because we have to set goals, we have calendars, we have schedules, we progress through life, we set goals. Look at us. That's what we do. And yet, on a deeper level, what we do is so incredibly irrational. And so Dostoevsky figured out this internal contradiction of human beings. Yes, we want everything to be, settled and beautiful. But then he says, but when everything is settled and beautiful, we're going to start acting in a counterintuitive way. Why? Because we want to prove that we are not a piano key. And so this motion of this expectation that we will react a certain way under certain circumstances because that is the logical thing to do. Well, Dostoevsky says, no, we will actually try to prove in certain situations that we have free will. And if proving that we have free will would necessitate us acting against our rational self-interest, we will. And then what's more, because we have the ability to rationalize anything, we will use our mind to create rationale for doing something that was not in our best interest. And that is just absolute genius. And so where does this logic come from? So first of all, Notes from the Dead House, winter notes on summer impressions, notes from underground. This is the third set of notes. But also, it's another third in a lineup of books. So those of you who were reading with me in the spring, we did the 100 Days of Charming Rotten Scoundrels, and we started with Goethe's Werther, then we read Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, we read Lermontov's Hero of Our Time, and Onegin and Pechorin. The Pushkin and Lermontov characters are the most Byronic characters in Russian literature. And then those two influenced Turgenev, and Turgenev's Bazarov is one of the most important characters in Russian literature. So we read Fathers and Sons, and in Fathers and Sons, we encounter the first Russian revolutionary. So Turgenev, after the publication of Fathers and Sons in 1862, couldn't really live in Russia. So he spent the last 20 years of his life, because he had a sweetheart who was French, the Spanish-French soprano Pauline Viardot. He spent the time in Paris and in Baden-Baden. Just like Victor Hugo, those of you who read Les Miserables with me, Victor Hugo despised Napoleon III, or Napoleon the Lesser, as he is referred to in both the Hugo essay about Napoleon III, and do you see how Dostoevsky references that in Notes from Underground? Because he says the previous Napoleon and the current one. So this book is written during the time of Napoleon III. Pauline Viardot's husband detested Napoleon III just as much as Victor Hugo did. So Hugo spent 18 years away from Paris, which he loved. And Pauline Viardot's husband, Paul Viardot, had to leave France as well. That's why they lived in Baden-Baden. So Turgenev needs to leave Russia because the critics are after him from both the right and the left. He must have done something right? He must have written the best Russian novel ever because everyone was upset with him. The liberals and the progressive critics and the radicals were upset with him because this character whom he created, Bazarov, doesn't self-realize as a revolutionary. He seems to say all the right things, like nature is our workshop. We are going to make things out of the natural world that will assist human beings towards progress. He always makes these big progressive announcements. He says stuff like, well, we just, everything that we have here just has to be swept away, and whatever comes next is bound to be better. And then he encounters the impossible. I mean, his arguments with Pavel Kirsanov are delightful, but they're the arguments between an 1840s liberal and an 1860s radical. So Pavel Kirsanov is not conservative. He's a liberal who believes in what was essential to classical liberalism of the early 19th century. But Bazarov is this radical character. He talks about revolution, talks about sweeping everything off. And then he encounters the impossible. He encounters a woman who asks the most impossible of questions. Because Anna Sergeyevna Odintsova, she says to him, and so in this perfect world of yours, will there be no just stupid, jealous, petty, spiteful people? Just how are you going to square human irrationality, human complexity in a perfect world? And so Dostoevsky will read that novel and he will say, well, how do you place an irrational human being into the Crystal Palace? What if this irrational human being, out of sheer ingratitude, out of sheer lampoonery, will pick up a rock and break the windows out of spite, not because he is engaged in any kind of rational activity, but just because stones break windows. And so let's prove this point yet again by breaking a window in this perfect rational edifice. But there's a book between Fathers and Sons and Notes from Underground. And that book is the one that some of you actually read and some of you attempted reading and abandoned. I haven't touched that book since grad school. And I actually went through the entire thing this time with this newly refurbished and full of ideas mind of Anna Barker. And I was laughing so hard all the way through. It's the most feminist book I've ever read. The entire novel, Chernyshevsky's What's to Be Done, which is his response to Turgenev. So the progressive radical critic said to Turgenev, why did you create such a spectacular character like Bazarov with a potential to become a revolutionary leader who doesn't self-realize? You don't give him the path to self-realization as a revolutionary. And conservatives were upset with Turgenev because they said, you are the #1 novelist of Russia. How dare you bring a revolutionary character onto the pages of a novel that everyone will read? You are legalizing dissent and revolution in Russia. This is going to bring the whole edifice down. So Turgenev was getting it from both sides. But the most important response to Turgenev was Chernyshevsky's What's to Be Done, where he talks about the Crystal Palace. And so Chernyshevsky is so radical that he is imprisoned in, guess where? Peter and Paul Fortress, where Dostoevsky was after his arrest in the late 1840s. So this is the early 1860s. Chernyshevsky is in jail. When you're in jail, you have lots of time on your hands. And so Chernyshevsky writes this novel in jail. And you should be asking the question, Anna, it sounds like it's a very revolutionary, progressive book. How did the jailers let him pen this manuscript and actually leave jail with this revolutionary book? Remember, this is a book that Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, will read 5 times in one summer. This book, Chernyshevsky's What's to Be Done, will convince Lenin that revolution is possible in the here and now in Russia. And he will write then his own What's to Be Done, which is in dialogue with Chernyshevsky. So it is a revolutionary book written in jail by a radical revolutionary young man, Chernyshevsky. But he conceals all of the most utopian ideas into the dreams of the main character, whose name is Vera Pavlovna. And then for about 10 pages of the novel, we have a character there whose name is Rakhmetov. who will be the model, the literary model that all Russian revolutionaries will emulate. I'm going to talk to you about the stuff ad nauseum when we'll be reading Dostoevsky's Demons, because as you can sense, Dostoevsky will be in dialogue with Turgenev's Fathers and Sons and Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done for the rest of his writing career. So 1862, Fathers and Sons is published, Fireworks. 1863, Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done is published, and he conceals the most revolutionary ideas in these utopian dreams of the main character. Fireworks, Dostoevsky's response to these two books, which are discussed by all of the Russian literati intellectuals, is Notes from Underground. And if Chernyshevsky in What is to be Done is saying that human beings can put aside their personal and innermost and visceral wantings, that's the Dostoevsky word. In Russian, there's a very good word for it, katenia. It's like, it's that little voice in us that says, I want. It's like the 3-year-old in the backseat of your car. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I was there yet, I need to go potty. That human being, Dostoevsky says, is the essential us. It always is inside. It's the core of who we are. How do we square that human being? How do we create ideologies that will box that human being and will force that human being to constantly be a piano key? And that is the question that he will proceed to attempt to answer in the rest of his novels. In Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done, the characters are very rational. The characters make decisions that are not at all personal. So Vera Pavlovna is supposed to marry this young man who is courting her, but she doesn't want to marry him because she knows that he's a scumbag. Her mom is, of course, delighted because he is of high society, but Vera Pavlovna needs to wiggle out of the whole thing. And so her brother's tutor, who's a medical student, attempts to get her position as a governess, but he realizes that she will still be under legal obligation to her parents. So the only way to get Vera Pavlovna away from her parents, who see marriage as the only option for her, is to marry her. And so they elope. But guess what? They are so rational about this that she has her own bedroom, he has her own bedroom, and they only meet at allotted times when they both will knock on each other's doors and ask if it's convenient for the two of them to meet. Then later on, Vera Pavlovna actually falls in love with his best friend. And do you know what this obliging husband, who never sleeps with her because they are rational human beings, he fakes his own death in order to make Vera Pavlovna a widow so that she can marry his best friend. I mean, it's like remarkable. And then she decides that she wants to study science. And of course, she's a woman and she has a hard time with science. But this friend who becomes her husband, he is really like enlightening Vera Pavlovna's mind so that she can understand science. I mean, the whole book is full of complete utilitarian positivism. Everyone is making decisions that are totally rational. There are no impulsive human visceral decisions in the entire book. And you read it and you laugh because it is so laughable. Some of you who actually tried to read it and abandoned it, they just couldn't read it, because those of us who have read wonderful literary creations understand that what that book is not literature, it's ideology. It's a pamphlet turned into a 400-page novel. Those of you who actually finished it and said, what a waste of time. Yes, because it is not a literary book. It is an ideological feminist treatise about positivism and how to get a woman away from being shackled by patriarchy and get her to be an active and activist member of society. And that's not how life works. And Dostoevsky, who encountered life in its most hideously ugly forms during his years of hard labor. I mean, he was in a barrack with 200 men who were murderers. There were like 2 feet of filth on the ground. There were cockroaches everywhere. Everyone had lice. The place was not heated. If you wanted to wash yourself in the winter, you broke through the bucket that was covered with ice to get to the water. That was life. I mean, Dostoevsky understood what life is, and there was nothing rational about it. And he knew that even in this place of loss, death, and degradation, that little person inside every single human being was saying, I want, I want, I want. These are my wantings. And so to counter Chernyshevsky's ideological tour de force, what is to be done? Dostoevsky says, no, I love my fat, my personal fat, more than I love all of humanity. Am I going to do all of these noble and grandiose things to save humanity? No, I will do what is conducive to my happiness. And beware of people who will tell you that they are doing grandiose, amazing things for all of humanity, because they are doing for their personal motivations too, because they too have the I want little creature inside, but we are given the ability to rationalize anything. So these people who will deprive you of your free will and happiness for the betterment of humanity will tell you just that. We are doing it for everyone's happiness. And Dostoevsky is saying, I've seen what everyone's happiness does to people. And let me tell you, it is not a pretty sight. So that is my contextualizing of everything that happened to Dostoevsky. So personal calamities, financial problems, he's having epileptic fits. He is writing his third notes based on all of these experiences that he had in his 20s and 30s. He's in his early 40s. He can't publish books. Like on a personal level, his life is a catastrophe. Health-wise, he is not in good shape. He is smoking way too much, and the epileptic fits get worse and worse. His brother's situation is complex. He just had a love affair with a woman whose name is Apolinaria Suslova. And guess what? I think this was like the love of his life. He was not a particularly attractive young man in his teens and 20s. And so now he's a published author, and the radical kids love him, right? Because he has been to Siberia for his ideas. So the radical kids are really interested in him. These kids who are ready to go to the barricades was explosives, right? And this young lady who is an aspiring writer, she writes to him, they meet, they travel in Europe together. She's lovely, she is so beautiful. And she is a revolutionary. I mean, he's in love with her, he's traveling with her while his wife is in St. Petersburg, because that marriage is a catastrophe. And she actually tells him that if she would get the opportunity to kill the Tsar, she would kill the Tsar. So do you see the conflict in Dostoevsky's mind? These students, these young radicals who want to blow up the world, have a ton of respect for him, because he was seemingly that young radical who wanted to blow up the world in his late 20s. And he actually, what Whitman says in Leaves of Grass, I'm the man who suffered, I was there. So Dostoevsky was the man who suffered, who was there. So these kids look up to him, and this is not the 40s. This is not the liberalism of the 40s. This is not the kind of stuff where let's have a constitutional monarchy. Let's do legal reform. Let's preserve the whole edifice of the state. But somebody has their hello. Somebody has their could all of you mute yourselves right now, because I hear a lot of background noise. Thank you. Somebody still has their mic on. So if you have any background noise right now, can you mute yourselves? Really appreciate it. Thank you. So yes, Dostoevsky is saying that he is looked up. I mean, he is being hailed and treasured as this person who suffered, who was there, who did hard labor in Siberia. And yet he understands that what these young people who are now, so they're not the 40s liberals who just want constitutional monarchy, legal reform, freedom of speech, freedom of press, just tweak the system and it will work so much better, right? And also what was so important for the 40s liberals is abolition of serfdom. Well, we need to add this one more aspect to this whole narrative. So Serfdom is abolished in 1861. Fathers and Sons is published in 1862. What is to be Done is published 1863. Notes from Underground comes in 1864. Those of you who read Anna Karenina with me, you know how catastrophic the result of the abolition of serfdom was. It was mishandled spectacularly. I mean, students who sometimes read Anna Karenina with me, they are like, Anna, we thought it was like a novel about love. The whole thing is about land reform. And so, yes, so all of this, you know, the serfs were freed, but they were dispossessed. And so this was adding to the radicalization of the students. So serfdom was seemingly abolished, but the students wanted to blow things up at this point, because for these 60s radicals, it was not enough to have legal reform, land reform. It was not enough to just say, we'll have monarchy with a constitution, limited monarchy. They felt that the entire edifice needs to come down. And they felt that Dostoevsky's perhaps was their man, but he wasn't. And so the complexity of the voice of the underground man includes all these elements. So do you see how miraculous this book is? And of course, in part two, Dostoevsky mocks us. He says, oh, by the way, do you know how I got to be this like grumpy person in my 40s who's constantly contradicting myself? Well, I was a grumpy official in my 20s. And this is where translation, do you remember how hard, what a hard time we had with all of the translations of Fathers and Sons last spring, where I felt that Bazarov's brilliance was not communicated to readers because the translations were not giving him true justice. In this case, translation works better in English than, I mean, this reference, I was an uncivil civil servant. It doesn't work this well in Russian, but I think it's just brilliant to call him the uncivil civil servant. And I mean, have you ever dealt with bureaucracy? It's irrational, and it has power over you because it knows that you cannot proceed from point A to point B without getting a stamp on a piece of paper. And Dostoevsky just explores that so fantastically. I mean, he comes in a line of all of these writers like Gogol. Remember, I posted a big chunk from Gogol's Nevsky Prospect. But Gogol loves exploring the infuriating complexity of Russian bureaucracy. He wrote an entire play about it called The Inspector General, where it shows this provincial town where everyone is so corrupt. It is hilarious. But then they find out that an inspector will be sent to make sure that they're not stealing too much. And this young man shows up in town and they assume that he is the inspector. So they start bribing him immediately. I mean, to the point where they like bribe him with marrying the governor's daughter. It is hilarious. And then the last line of the play is even funnier. The inspector general has arrived. So, I mean, they bribed the wrong person. And so now all of their little shenanigans have been revealed. So Dostoevsky comes from the tradition of Gogol, who is blasting the ludicrousness of the bureaucratic system of Russia. And then, of course, after him will come someone like Saltykov-Shchedrin. It's fascinating. Do you remember we posted that article that somebody still has their mic on? Could everyone who is here mute yourselves? Hello? Hello, 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 hello. Anna Barker here. Could I possibly ask everyone to mute your mics because I can hear an echo? Hello, 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 hello. Please mute yourself. Thank you, really appreciate it. I think the voice is gone. Thank you so much. So it's fascinating that Pavir and Volokhovsky just translated a novel by Saltykov-Shchedrin. That was the New York Times article about their latest translation. He is also a writer who was known for blasting the bureaucracy. And so Dostoevsky is definitely playing with all of these fabulous references to the goofiness of life in a big city. And he just, I mean, the underground man in his 20s, he hates the officer who does saber rattling. And so on the one hand, he despises this officer and he makes this officer's life miserable because the officer just needs a bureaucratic nothing from this young man. And he feels that this gorgeous specimen of humanity who is tall and handsome and loved by all, I am going to make his life miserable because he needs one signature And I'm the only person who can get that signature to him, and he will suffer. But at the same time, like I told the students, how often have you been to, let's say, a bar and you're sitting in the corner sipping your 7-Up while life is happening in the other corner? And then there's that like super thrilling human being who is loved by everyone, and the party is there, and you are in your corner just hating the whole situation and saying that, well, I don't want to be a part of that group. They're so shallow, right? It's amazing how my students, after they read Notes from Underground, they understand it on levels that are so personal, to the point where I've had several students who memorized the speech, "Here comes all kinds of intelligence" speech that the Underground Man develops at delivers at the party. And then they actually recite it at a party. I mean, I've been told that my students sometimes like go to these events and, you know, get together with friends, and then they realize that some of them have taken Anna Barker's classes on Dostoevsky, and they all stand together in a corner and sulk out of spite. And they look at everyone and they're like, well, these people, they obviously have not read all of Dostoevsky, and look at us, we are so superior to them. I mean, it lends itself to reinterpretation in our personal lives. And so the Underground Man does that bumping. And I always tell my students, how often did you duel with people with clothes? You know, like, I mean, I'm sorry to say, ladies do it all the time. I do it every day. You know, I put on like something and I look at myself in the mirror and it's like, well, this will make so-and-so's life miserable. I mean, like, look at my pink high heel shoes. This will make the life of this person absolutely miserable. Yay. It's that little I want that is inside of all of us. You know, like, is it rational? No, we do it out of spite because we're human, because we're not a piano key. So then he meets Lisa, and Lisa is an amazing human being. Lisa is complicated. Lisa is on the receiving end of his harangue, and it's fascinating how he gives that poem by Nekrasov as a reference point 3 times in part 2. And Nekrasov was the editor of The Contemporary when Dostoevsky published his first work, Poor Folk. Nekrasov was a progressive literary critic and a progressive writer. He was all about bettering humanity, and he was all about, you know, raising the consciousness of human beings to make a better life for all. And so Nekrasov loved Dostoevsky when he wrote Poor Folk, because Nekrasov assumed that Dostoevsky is going to be like a social progress kind of writer. But then Dostoevsky wrote The Double, and nobody understood it because it was so incredibly complicated. And it revealed to us that human beings are complicated, that they are not piano keys. And so Dostoevsky blasts Nekrasov over and over and over again in part 2, because that poem is about how we will rehabilitate prostitutes by marrying them. And so Dostoevsky makes absolute fun of this narrative. And the hilarious thing is that he goes on this harangue about how, if you continue on this path, Lisa, you are going to end up dead, young, and nobody will mourn you. And Lisa is listening to him, and the thing that she says to him just kills him. She says, you sound like a book, okay? And so that is the greatest indictment of the Underground Man, because do you remember? I mean, he's a writer, right? He actually invents us as readers. He says, oh, you know, fine. I keep addressing you as dear readers, but I know that nobody will read me, so you don't exist. But I will keep addressing you as dear readers because it allows me to continue my harangue. And so I always tell my students, just think, we don't exist. The Underground Man invented us as a ploy, as a literary device to allow him to imagine that he has readers in order to continue his harangue. So we don't exist. We are just a fictitious invention in the feverish mind of the Underground Man. And so he read himself into the underground, and now he's writing himself even deeper into the underground. And Lisa says to him, dude, you are so phony. I mean, you are like so full of it. You sound like a book. And the Underground Man is just incensed by that. He's like, I'm going to make you suffer for this. I wanted you to believe that my harangue is not a literary quotation, but a heartfelt aspiration of my zeal to reform prostitutes like Nekrasov told us to. And then Lisa listens to him and listens to him and listens to him, and she understands what only a woman could understand if she feels deeply, that he is unhappy, that the scream of literary citations, the scream of the sophisticated 19th century mind is a scream of loneliness and alienation. And this is the undoing of the underground men. The way Anna Odintsova is the undoing of Bazarov, because what Anna Odintsova understands about Bazarov is that he's personally unhappy. So that final meeting when they have, when he tells her, just blow out the flame that is going out, and she does. Well, Lisa comes to the underground man, and she leaves him because she understands that what he wants is suffering forever. What she can give him is understanding. And so the underground man has to make a decision to stand on his harangue soapbox for the rest of his life and complain about everything, or have a reason not to complain, have a human being in his life who understands him deeply and profoundly to the point where he can say, things are not so bad. There's connection between human beings. Do we want that? No, we want to have reasons to complain. I always ask my students at this point, have you complained about anything today? Yeah. Did you have reasons to complain? I always tell them, like, look at yourselves. You're so young. You're so healthy. All of your joints work. You had probably like breakfast and lunch today. You will have dinner. You will have probably a warm place to sleep at night. Like, you have no idea how lucky you are. Why are you complaining? And the most important thing is all of your joints work. And so the students are like, okay, I get it. Yes, the underground man is being unreasonable. But why is he unreasonable? Because he's a human being. And so that's when he asks, like, what do you prefer? Cheap happiness or lofty suffering? So the students say, I want lofty happiness. I'm like, not an option. So what do we want from life? We want, eternal joy. Is life conducive to eternal joy? No, it hits us in the face every single day. And at one point, we just want to say, I'm making these decisions because I have free will, because I'm not a piano key. And Dostoevsky says, well, someday we'll create such spectacularly scientific structures that all economic problems will be solved, all mathematical problems will be solved, and every possible problem would be pre-solved even before it occurs. And that's when we all move into the Crystal Palace. What is he doing here? He's spoofing Chernyshevsky. He's spoofing Chernyshevsky's What Is to Be Done. These like utilitarian, progressive human beings who are always making rational decisions. And Dostoevsky just says, life is so complicated. Life is so complicated. And sometimes we just make a decision to prove that we can, that we have free will, that we are human beings endowed with an ability to shake our fist at the wall. And so all of that, sticking out of one's tongue at society from the comfort of your home, or shaking of your fist at walls. There's a bar in Iowa City called Dublin Underground. And when this novel was 150, 10 years ago, I actually read it with my students in the bar in Dublin Underground. There's a pool table there, which is spectacular because there's the reference of the officer playing pool. But the most important thing about Dublin Underground is, well, it's underground, right? So we screamed from our little hole underground, that it also has a brick wall in the back of the bar. And the student who was reading the passage about sometimes you just want to give the wall a painful beating, he actually turned around and he shook his fist at the wall. It was priceless. Still remember his name, Jeremy. He really understood this novel way more profoundly than most human beings. And so Dostoevsky says, so fine, like we are these worms that sit in our little holes, but still want to preserve human dignity. And we do not want to be put into little boxes. And we want to just scream out that we are endowed with the ability to make decisions. And then at the end, like last page, he says, but we tend to want to know which direction to go. and leave us without a book, leave us without someone telling us what to do, and we become rudderless. We become flustered. And someday we will even contrive to be born out of an idea. And that final statement on the last page of Notes from Underground is a precursor of everything that he will write after that. Because guess what? The underground man evolves into Raskolnikov, the prostitute Lisa, who has boundless capacity for empathy, evolves into Sonichka Marmeladova, and Raskolnikov, right now, at the moment where we are in the novel, he is consumed by an idea. And you sort of sense it bubbling up every once in a while. He has this idea, but he can't crystallize what the idea is. He is a human being who seemingly, like, viscerally, intuitively makes all the good decisions, right? He leaves money for the Marmelados. He sees that poor girl who's wandering drunk and undressed along the boulevard, and he gives money to the policeman to shelter her from the lecher across the street. Those are all very human ways to cope with human misery. But he wants to snap out of his humanity. He wants to get to the point where he will be governed by an idea which will allow him to snap out of the confines of what it means to be a human being. And it is a terrifying proposition. And just to give you the heads up, in Russian, the word crime is преступление. If you add one E to it, it becomes переступление, which means overstepping. He comes up with this idea that gnaws him at the end of Notes from Underground. What if human beings will come up with these ideas that will allow them to get over their pangs of conscience, to step over their own humanity for the sake of an idea? And that is what kept him up through many a sleepless night. So that's what I wanted to say about Notes from Underground. As you can tell, this slender little tome will continue keeping us up at night forever and ever, because we'll talk about it every time. So when we'll have our Zooms on Crime and Punishment, we'll talk about Notes from Underground. When we'll get to the idiot, we'll talk about Notes from Underground. We'll get to demons, we'll talk a lot about Notes from Underground, because this idea that Dostoevsky had, he completely understands the human being that screams, I want my fat, I love my fat, I hate humanity, I like, what do I care about humanity? I love my own fat. He completely understands that human being. What terrifies him is that human beings will come up with an idea which will exonerate them from the pangs of conscience, that will give them permissiveness to act outside their own humanity. And I shall say no more, because we need to get to Raskolnikov coming up with these clever little realizations. So let me look at the comments, because there were several. I know that I saw the word Crystal Palace. So let me just go through comments. Okay, there's a reference to Napoleon the Lesser. Okay, so Anna Barker. Oh, yes. Thank you. It's a reference to me and my ideas. I'm doing a talk on Dostoevsky and his hyperventilation about the great man of history at the Iowa City Book Festival. I'll post it on both Substack and the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature site. It will be 2 weeks from today. That's why we had to do the Zoom now, because I have a board meeting next Tuesday. And I have my presentation the Tuesday after, and Tuesday seemed to work with my teaching schedule this semester. So yes, please come. Iowa City Book Festival, 4:30 to 5:30, 2 weeks from today, at the public library. And then we will screen the most shocking of movies, Taxi Driver, because it is the most famous US adaptation of Notes from Underground, which gets it all wrong. And we'll talk in the post-film discussion about how the American version of The Underground Man gets it all wrong in a very American way. Substack, yes, I'm going to keep working on it. Fathers and Sons was an enjoyable read. Yes. Yes, so yeah, fathers and sons, connection to fathers and sons. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments. Fathers and sons and notes from underground connections. Um, Yes, so we understand why there was background sounds, and we completely understand. And it is the best explanation ever. It was a human explanation. A neighbor brought an apple pie, and the neighbor had to be thanked for the apple pie. So 3 cheers for neighbors, 3 cheers for apple pies, and 3 cheers for thanking for apple pies. I totally agree with it. The new Crystal Palace is artificial intelligence. Yes, dear readers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I completely agree. I sound like the underground man. I actually had a conversation last night where I was saying artificial intelligence is the next Tower of Babel. Look at us. Look at this new toy that we have. It is so rational. It just negates everything irrational about us human beings. And will it have the same screeching result as the Tower of Babel? Absolutely. As long as we preserve our free will, as long as we remain like stubborn, irrational, and spiteful, humanity will survive. As soon as we become the kind of creatures who are born out of an idea, beware, beware. All right, so let's see, 2 more. Okay, somebody just had to run early, and I think that's it. So very nice. On to crime and punishment. Indeed, yes. So thank you for these comments. I think I addressed them all. If anyone has questions, like I can still answer them now, please do ask. Otherwise, I have to comment on yesterday's chapter for crime and punishment. And this weekend was just so incredibly busy. I wrote my next article, and it's going to be published this week. I'll post it on the site. Best title ever, hands down. A Few Loose Thoughts on the Empire Waste. It's all about the post-revolutionary fashion and how it granted us the empire waste, which was best invention of humanity, hands down. It's about how the ladies of the revolution threw the corset temporarily on the dust heap of history. So I had so much fun, but I was doing so much research. I was doing research on corsets and panniers and stays and crinoline and hoop skirts and everything that has to do with 18th century high fashion and how then it was completely pared down after the revolution. So Anna Barker had her head in books on fashion and ladies' clothing. And so it was a lot of fun, but so much work. Yes. Any connection from, yes, from Notes from Underground to Barbie. Well, so those of you who know my little secret. In my free time, I'm teaching a class on Barbie and Mattel and Ruth Handler at the Tippy College of Business, and I'm having way too much fun in that class. Those are the students who are reading Paradise Lost tomorrow, because I see the connection between Adam and Eve and their relationship and how one is created as a sidekick for the other, and the relationship between Barbie and Ken. So tomorrow, just before the class begins, because one of the questions was, is there a connection between Notes from Underground and Barbie? Just before we start putting Barbie into the context of Milton's Paradise Lost, I'm going to say, here comes all kinds of intelligence. So on this cheerful note, let's get back to crime and punishment. So I'll do 2 Zooms probably halfway through the novel and at the end of the novel, and stay with me through all of Dostoevsky, because trust me, it's going to be one of the most rewarding reading journeys of your life. I've read all of these books, and I've taught Crime and Punishment so many times before, but just going through it line by line, I'm laughing so hard. I'm going to have really good tummy muscles by the time we're done with all of Dostoevsky, because if you are uncertain whether, like, this seems funny, but it's so off, like, do I dare laugh? Because it is just so inappropriate, seemingly, to laugh at this point. Laugh. Dostoevsky wants us to laugh. I mean, that's why I posted that photo of myself as the Dostoevsky impersonator. I actually posted it, and I looked at my facial expression. I started laughing just looking at my facial expression, because I thought, oh my goodness, it was so hard to preserve like a serious face, because he was so funny. And so he read over Dostoevsky's grave, and you would think, like, well, you're supposed to be like filled with this tremendous amount of appreciation and you have to think deep and grateful thoughts. And all I could do was laugh because it was so hilarious. And so this impersonator did it so well because you could see like there was a twinkle in the corner of his eye, but he preserved the dignity so well. But everyone else was just rolling with laughter because it is so funny. Yes, without a good laugh, life is just not conducive to happiness. So on this very giggly note, I will see you at the next Zoom, and stay with the journey because Dostoevsky will explain everything, absolutely everything. So to Crime and Punishment and beyond. Bye bye.